The sound of one hand clapping. Everybody knows, from any background, the phrase, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" It's permeated our culture. It's a Zen koan. What is the sound of one hand clapping? When asked that, most people go like this. Looks like it's silence is the sound of one hand clapping. As you go through the stages of development, you come up with other ideas. But it's usually left that silence is the sound of one hand clapping. Let me tell you what the sound of one hand clapping is from a Jewish and a Kabbalistic perspective. And actually, from a Zen perspective too. We have three hands. There's a right hand, which is the Yad Gedola. There's a left hand, which is the Yad Hazaka. And miraculously, there's a center hand, the Yad Ramah. How do we get to this center hand? In all cultures, we have this split into right and left sides, right and left hands. The right hand is always good, the left hand is always evil. The right hand masculine, the left hand feminine. In every culture, the left hand is always a pejorative term. It's denoted by negative type words. Gauche, links, sinistre, left. All words that connotate negative. When people learn how to do things, everybody does things with their right hand. So the left hand is an adjunct hand. A hand left to be kind of secondary, not for daily functions. Plato said that not using the hands equally is actually a cultural fetish, that we should be ambidextrous. But ambidexterity implies a sense of two-ness, a sense of duality, that we have a right side and a left side. And it's like a big deal to make that left side equal to the right. In society, we even call that like the feminine side. We're trying to make it equal to the right. The whole concept of silence being the sound of one hand clapping is that its use is either of one or the other side of the hand. Let me propose to you as we develop this, as I've developed my left side, and my left side has become balanced with my right, the third hand appears, the center hand appears, the Yad Ramah appears. The center pillar. In yoga, they call that the Sushumna. After the Ida and the Pingala are balanced, the Sushumna opens up. That's the third hand. The third hand is like this, in the center of the body. When this third hand, opens. It opens into two hands. But those two hands come out of the one. They come out of the unity of the center hand, the miraculous third hand of the body. They split into two hands, but they are really representatives of the spiritual hand. So when it's called upon to use the hand on this side of the body, it uses that. On the other side of the body, it uses that. But these are not ambidextrous. They're not two hands. They're one hand that is split. One hand splits. Now we know that in the morning when we get up and we say Modi Ani, that at the night when we were dreaming and we were in the spiritual world, that spiritual world is that center hand, that oneness, the center pillar of the tree of life. And what do? We say Modi Ani, and after we say it, we take our hands and go like this. Because in the physical plane, we function in two-ness. In the spiritual plane, we are in oneness. In a certain sense, that's the advantage of the physical plane. In the Aleph worlds, Aleph meaning one, we are oneness. We split out of that into the physical plane, the Bria world of the letter Bet, the first letter of Torah, the two hands. The two-ness that split out of the oneness is a great advantage. But as we use these two hands, we're not using them as ambidextrous. We're using them as a unit of oneness that's split as a function. We have no left and right. We only have a center hand that uses the left and right sides of the body. This third hand is a miraculous entity. This permeates our entire culture. Let me go on. After we do the Modi Ani, we then wash our hands. We then pull our hands from left to right, right to left 3 times. And then we rub them together again. We bring them from the separateness that was created in the physical, and we show that they were one in the spiritual. And then we separate them again. We separate them from that unity again into separateness in the Bet. However, they are unified. The advantage of the physical world is that it's the letter Bet split into two-ness. It's a parallelism. Look how we are. From the center pillar down, we're mirror images off both sides. Our Siamese twin has been split. And this is what happens even in marriage. It's not that we get a second person. This was our other half. This was our other half. We're the right hand. The wife was the left hand. To come together as a whole. So what is the sound of one hand clapping? The sound of one hand clapping is this. The sound of one hand clapping is the normal clap in the physical world. It shows the approval from our spiritual essence. The sound of one hand clapping isn't silence. The sound of one hand clapping is action in the physical world. And that's the advantage of this physical world over the spiritual plane. The soul comes down into the body, and the body provides action. Action because of the duality of the seeming duality of the split. It splits into left, right, front, back, up, down, inside, outside, right, left, good, evil. This is the advantage of the physical world. To be able to raise this physical world up back into the spiritual world, like the two hands coming together. The physical world comes together into the spiritual world back. So the sound of one hand clapping is a clap, because the one hand that's clapping is the Yad Ramah, the center hand, the third hand, the spiritual plane down into the physical. The place where one can do mitzvahs. The soul comes into the body. The advantage of the body is it can perform physicality in mitzvahs. Otherwise, the soul is in the physical plane only. That's what this is all about. The sound of one hand clapping. It's not one of these high spiritual pursuits, silence. The sound of one hand clapping is noise. It's approval. It's physicality. And that's the advantage of Judaism, bringing the spiritual into the physical plane. And that physical plane is able to rise as a Keter Malkus, above that of the Keter plane, the supposedly spiritual only. Keter Malkus is the physical that crowns the spiritual. And that comes from the third hand, the Yad Ramah, the center hand. So when we use our hands now, think of them not as two hands, but one hand that's split. The spiritual hand that's split down here for action. If you only use one hand, you're only playing with half a deck. You're missing the point. So one of the ways to get into this is to start using the left hand until you have somewhat of a psychological balance, so that you can even approach the idea of a third hand. It's very hard to go into the third hand before you even gotten into the second hand. Now this comes, as you know, I have another sidebar, a sidelight here, of tennis of the future. The tennis of the future will be with two forehands. It'll be the center hand that's split off both sides. There will be no backhands in the tennis of the future. How foolish to think that there would be a backhand when you could use the other side. The second split, the left hand. But this is not an ambidexterity trying to teach the left hand to be like the right hand. It's only a stage along the way to get to the center hand. And once you get to that center hand, you see, then they split easily. So I propose to you to look at the koan the Japanese saying, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And to understand that's the center hand, the center pillar, that functions as two in this physical world. The aleph of the spiritual plane, the one, becomes the bet, the two in this physical plane. Making the physical plane into the spiritual plane. And showing that the physical plane, because it is the container of the spiritual plane, is even higher than the spiritual plane alone. Because the container has a life of its own.